question is, what does this have to do with us here, right, in our schools, all right? Does it have anything, maybe it's totally unrelated, that's something way over there, right, you know? But what connections can we actually find to our own work as educators, as artists, as arts educators in our schools and our communities? Let's talk for 2 minutes, and then we'll ask for a representative from each table to share what came out of the conversation, all right? Go for it.
The Waiting for Superman event, which didn't see the problems in public school as part of a community problem, but as the ultimate source, and pretty much we were demonized in that film. And that was a single story that wasn't exactly accurate and very damaging. The other one was about our juvenile hall students who believe the single story that is told about them, educationally, socially, criminally, and their self-worth is completely tossed, and they don't even want to attempt anything because they don't think they're worthy even of attempting something. And there was actually a third strand about people in the educational system saying, oh, those kids, or oh, those parents, or they don't want to have our services, it's not worth it, and how devastating that kind of language is as a single story. So that's what we talked about.
We talked about how devastating it can be for the individual because they accept that single story, the same thing that Loretta was saying, the tragedy of that. The interesting part is I have a 20-year-old who's biracial, and I'm very proud of being an Indian from Malaysia, and he keeps telling me, Mom, get over the race, Mom, you know, we're all mixed and we don't care anymore, get over it. And so it's really forced me to relook. But then my colleague here talked about in schools. I was in the school system for a long time, and in the cafeteria you do see young people, the Russian Baptists, the, you know, the Vietnamese kids, and so forth. So there is that difference, and
I want to just,
and I do want to add that children do race and play race. They do it differently than we do. It's fluid. It's situational, and a lot of how they view race it depends on their class and education. Yes, they separate in the play yard, and then when we have children that say they didn't, I mean, my children are the same, they look at race similar to what your children do, but race, even at the university level, in subtle levels, soft racism, perceptions, it all plays out. So it just plays out differently in this next generation than in our generation or previous generations.
But really it's a constant adapting and relooking. And one of the things that we talked about is that there's this attempt, this ongoing effort to get beyond the single story is a really important argument for arts as part of our schools and our communities, because just as there's no single story, there's no single language, and that we need to provide multiple languages for people to keep understanding who we all are and accessing our own developing knowledge about ourselves and others.
Anyways, I want to just share a quick story about that I think for me was influential in helping me to understand how this idea of the single story doesn't just affect black people or people of color, but affects white folks in very powerful ways. A good friend of mine is a guy named Jason Carney. He's from a little suburb of Dallas called Mesquite, Texas, all right? Jason and I have performed quite a bit around the country, and he's an ex-skinhead. He was part of a group called the Confederate Hammerskins down outside of Dallas. And he was in this group for many years as a teenager. When he was about 17, about to be 18 years old, Jason's fun, their weekend fun, him and the other Confederate Hammerskins, they used to go to what was known to be the local gay hangout in Dallas. One of the guys, they would get really high, do a lot of drugs. They would go hang out. One of the guys would sit down on a bench, and as soon as somebody kind of came up to sort of, you know, enter conversation or flirt with the guy that was there, they would jump out of the bushes and they would beat the guy down. This was their weekend fun, right? They would go beat up gay people, go beat up black people. So the last time this actually happened, Jason and his buddies got really coked up, went out, they jump on this guy. This gay man that they jumped on knew some kind of martial arts because he starts to open up a can of whoop-ass on them, right? And, you know, I mean, they're just shocked. They're getting knocked left and right and center. And, you know, unbeknownst to Jason, one of his friends actually brought a gun with him that day. And his friend pulled the gun out and he shot the man and he killed him. And so Jason and his two buddies, the two other skinheads, came before the judge. The judge said, you know, something that Jason, he always talks about, when he ever tells a story, he says, this would never happen to Bryonn if this was him in the situation. But the judge said, the guy who pulled the trigger is doing life. He's in Texas right now doing life sentence for, you know, over 15 years now. But the judge said to Jason and his buddy, he said, because you boys were so high and on drugs, you can do life with your friend, or you can do 1 year in a drug detention center, in a drug treatment facility, and get your act together, get cleaned up, and you can go home. Yeah, so that doesn't really happen too often, right? If you know, are black or Latino or Arab or South Asian or of color, you know. So, but Jason actually, you know, realized that and has this experience changed his life because they put him in this detention center, this treatment facility. His roommate, karma is serious. His roommate was a gay black man who was HIV positive. So Jason Tripoli did not want to be there. He's put in this cell with Patrick in this facility. Patrick's HIV during that year turned to AIDS. So Jason watched this man develop sores and lesions begin to deteriorate, and just the conversations they had changed his whole life, changed his whole idea of this single story. You know, Patrick would say, why do you hate black people, man? Have you ever known a black person? Have you ever known a gay person? Where'd you get all these ideas from about what black people and gay people are like? He said, black people went to Europe during the so-called Dark Ages, and we brought all kinds of civilization and science and architecture to Spain, and, you know, the Moors were there for hundreds of years, and you should be thankful. Talking about we lazy. We worked so hard, we deserve a vacation after 400 years of free labor, you know, so they had these conversations Jason had never had with anybody because he had never known a black person and been in that kind of close space with a black person or a gay person. So Patrick died within 9 months. Changed Jason's whole life. He left the facility. He went home. He got out of the Confederate Hammerskins. He ended up marrying a woman from Thailand. So he went from hating all people who were not white to marrying a brown woman, having a daughter. So he had to quit his job at the porn store because that wasn't going to work anymore, you know. But when I met him in 1999, he was in Chicago on the National Poetry Slam stage performing, one of the top 10 poets in the country. And Jason was performing a poem about his Southern heritage. And this poem that he performed, I'll never forget. He did it much later on Def Poetry Jam. You can Google it, Jason Carney, Southern Heritage. Look him up, great tool to use in the classroom. And Jason talks about how his daughter will not be practiced at turning her head. She will not have the racist Southern heritage that I grew up with. He says she's part Thai, part Laotian, part redneck, part hick. She will walk down the street and greet people in multicultural phrases like "Sabadi kwa, y'all." And we all broke out laughing when we heard that. So that changed Jason's life. He went into writing poetry, and that became his therapy. And now he talks about white privilege, and he talks about the brainwashing that he has. And he says, when he talks to college students, he says, we all have this. We all have this stuff. The same way men learn sexism from the time they come out the womb. He says white people learn racism from the time they, you know, begin to get taught anything, you know. So, and he teaches this, and folks hear and listen to him in a way they would never hear or listen to me, right? And so that experience he had helped him to see that there's more than just a single story that he learned from the time he was a child. And I think it's a powerful demonstration of how it doesn't just affect folks of color, folks in Africa, folks in other countries, but really has implications for us all. So with that, I want you to just give yourselves a big round of applause.